Hello everybody, Omni here. Today we're going to be recapping, discussing, and sharing our predictions for what comes after episode 3 of Game of Thrones. And today's episode was actually officially called not the Battle of Winterfell, but the Long Night. I will still call this the Battle of Winterfell. So real quick, we're going to go ahead and preface this by saying spoilers. Get the heck out of here if you haven't seen the episode, because I will be recapping it and then going into my thoughts on the episode as a whole. So here, basically, I'm going to try to wrap this up because there's a lot of it's just one huge battle where we cut between different characters. So there's a lot of things. I think I have a lot of notes, but I'm just going to gloss over pretty much the important aspects of it. Namely, Sam should have just gotten in the dang crypts. He was useless. He didn't do anything except get Ed and almost Brienne killed. Again, he falters, falls to the ground in a daze. Ed's trying to get him, snapped out of it, and he gets stabbed through the back by a White Walker, and Sam finally gets his butt up and retreats into the castle, where almost the same stuff happens when they breach the walls. So before we get past that, I want to go up with the initial plan. I watched the after the episode behind the scenes thing, the inside the episode that's after the show. And they talk about how the Dothraki didn't stick to Jon's plan, because nobody really talked about why they just charged off into the darkness, into the fray. And according to the writers and the directors, they're just not comfortable with Jon's plan. They're not the type to sit and wait. So in true Dothraki fashion, after the Red Woman comes out, blesses all of their swords with the Lord of Light's flames, and she sets all of their blades ablaze with fire and sends them off into the darkness, where there's, not gonna lie, there is a beautiful shot where you have the Unsullied and all the other armies just looking out into the distance as you see the fires of their swords slowly flicker out one at a time. And it is haunting. Jorah and Ghost also charged out with the Dothraki, which was weird, but Jorah and Ghost both make it out. We don't actually see Ghost again after this charge. We only know that from the preview for next week's episode, the Ghost is still there because he's in a couple of the shots. But Jorah and a handful of Dothraki make it back out of the darkness alive, and mostly other empty horses. For the most part, Dany's entire Dothraki horde dies at the beginning of this fight. The Unsullied is the largest force, so they are at the front of Winterfell, guarding the main gates to the north. I think, if I remember correctly, they're flanked by Brienne, Jaime, Podrick, and those armies on the left side of Winterfell, while on the right side is all of the North folk, with the Night's Watch members, Sam, Ed, Tormund, and I think even the Wildlings are on the right hand side fighting them. So the forces are split, with the large majority being Dany's army and the center guarding from the main bulk, since that is the main entrance to the keep. So it makes sense. However, they lost half their force when they just kind of charged at the undead. In that meantime, Dany and Jon are on the sidelines with the dragons, waiting for the Night King to show up. After the Dothraki charge into battle and are immediately wiped out, Dany is at unease. She barks at Jon that the dead are already here and that what they do doesn't really matter at this point. And she takes Drogon and just takes off, which was also against the plan. And that's when things start kind of falling apart, because they were supposed to be sidelined for when they were needed. And that comes back into play when some things go awry here in just a little while. After that, there's a long pause after all the Dothraki flames go out, and out of the darkness is just a tidal wave of undead bodies, like a washing wave slams into the Unsullied when they're all perked up with their spears and their shields in their defense formation, and just it's literally like a wave crashing down on the side of some rocks and just starts taking over everybody. They start getting swarmed, rushed, and the battle begins. The Night King is nowhere to be seen for mostly the first half of the entire engagement. When Dany and Jon Jon follows Dany's lead and follows after her with Rhaegal, and they take to the field. They start thinning the herd with Dragonfire, taking out as many whites as they can, and it gives people enough time to kind of like mount a defense against the barrage, but it doesn't work for the long run. They get pushed back. Arya gives Sansa, we cut back to the keep. Arya gives Sansa a dagger. She tells her to retreat. There's not really anything she could do up there. She goes down to the crypts. When Dany and Jon take to the sky with the dragons, there's this giant wall of clouds or mist or a fog. It's not too clear what exactly it is, but this giant wall of just thick, cloudy mist hits the battlefield and takes them out, destroying their visibility completely. When the Unsullied and the other side flanking armies start getting overwhelmed and it calls for a retreat, they start moving back in behind the trenches that they were dug that are filled with flammable materials and pikes to prevent the dead from crossing, or at least getting them to stick in that while they light it up and create basically a moat of fire around Winterfell, which was supposed to be Dany's cue to do this, but because she got hot-headed at the loss of her Dothraki, she goes into the battle early, and when the mist takes over the battlefield, she can't see the signal, so there's a rushing struggle to get that lit, get the pyre lit, and they try shooting it with flaming arrows and they just can't make it, or they go out before they can actually start a flame on the wood, which gets this interesting and tense moment where the Red Woman comes out, Melisandre comes out, and she does the same thing that she did to the Dothraki swords, and the dead just scurrying around, attacking people all around her, distracts her, and it causes her not to be as focused. So it takes her a tense amount of time to actually get them to ignite, but she does successfully do it. During this time is where I mentioned that while the flanks and the front are getting overrun, this is where Sam gets knocked down and gets Ed killed, but he does make it back to the keep in that way. All the other armies start to retreat, our main characters making it into the castle and helping escort the people in, while the Unsullied create a wall and a funnel to allow people passage in. They become the strong force to get as many people back into the keep as they can, because the plan's fallen apart and the only thing they can do is get behind the trenches, get behind the firewall, and get as many people inside the castle as they can. We cut back to the heroes. Pretty much everybody is inside the castle except we don't have any sign of Jorah up until this point, as far as we can assume he's still out in the fog. The Hound starts to panic with all the fire going around with the lighting of the trenches and the dead falling around him, and he pretty much loses it. He is sidelined for the most of it because he's just in shock and can't really bring himself to like get into the fight. Beric's calling out to him, trying to get him motivated to get back into the fray. And it's not until Beric points out that Arya has joined the fight, and she takes out an impressive amount of people with her new staff, which breaks apart at the middle and becomes these twin little like dagger spear things. And she's just going to town at these things until she, gets overwhelmed eventually. And it's not until then that Clegane gets snapped out of this haze that he was in, and him and Beric go charging in to give her some kind of backup, where she runs into the castle halls, and we get to a really lovely scene with her in a library, and it becomes this like really haunting little like cat and mouse game where she gets trapped in this library and she's just being as quiet as possible. She's like so unnaturally quiet that her blood dripping on the ground is louder than her footsteps, because her blood hits the ground, and that's what signals some of them to come looking for her. But she manages to evade them, throws a book to distract them, and makes it back out of the room until she's caught by a barrage in that hallway. However, she is met and saved by both Beric and Clegane, and they, unfortunately, to save Arya from a wight that tackles her to the ground, Beric throws his flaming sword at the undead minion and takes it out, but leaving himself unarmed. Arya, taking the opportunity, runs past him, but unfortunately, Beric gets overwhelmed, and he goes out in pretty much the best of Hodor ways as you can, and just uses his own body to hold off as many as he can. He takes a bunch of stabs, cuts, and gashes before he stumbles in through the gates to the main hall, where he passes away on the ground from his wounds, and both the Hound and Arya are in the Great Hall, where they run into the Red Woman, which recants what she said to Arya back, I believe, in season 3, where she tells her that she will see her again, and that she will have permanently ended, or she would have closed many eyes permanently, both brown, green, and blue eyes, as she insinuates. And this gives Arya a chunk of motivation there, and she recants to her as well that, what do we say to the god of death? And she says, not today, in good old Syrio Forel fashion. And she exits the room for we don't know for what, for a little while. We do get a cut down to the crypt, where we see Tyrion's frustrated about him not being out there, and that maybe there's something that he could see that's going on that could turn the tide that nobody else is noticing. But they just kind of tell him that he needs to sit tight, that they're all down there for a reason. They talk, him and Sansa talk briefly about the relationship. He jokes about that, how they should still be married. And she makes a comment that wouldn't work because of his split loyalties, and because of the Dragon Queen. And Missandei does not like that tone, and she makes a good little quip that without that Dragon Queen, you wouldn't have a problem, because we'd already be dead, which is true. The Night King has appeared on the battlefield. He appears in the sky above the Godswood. After the fog has went up, Jon makes a retreat towards the Godswood to make sure Bran's okay. And that's when the Night King comes in, swooping out of the shadows in the sky. And instantly, Jon and Dany show up at just go into this like sky battle, chasing after him into the clouds. There's a nice little beautiful shot when they breach the clouds up into the night sky, where you just see the thick fog below them, and then the clear starry night sky with the moon and the dragons just hovering in there. But the Night King has kept himself concealed in the fog and does this like dipping maneuver where he comes out to attack and then retreats back into the fog to be just a sneaky little monster. Oh, it's pretty awesome. Him and Rhaegal, Viserion and Rhaegal get entangled in a death grip in this fight. And in the bucking, Rhaegal gets pretty injured to the point where he can't fly, but the Night King gets knocked from Viserion and hits the ground. They go down. Jon's been knocked off of Rhaegal while Rhaegal retreats from battle because he's too injured to go on. So Jon is left out in the middle of nowhere in front of Winterfell, surrounded by just all of the fallen of their army, their own army. The Night King emerges from the ground, and Dany just swoops right in on him and just nukes him with dragon fire. But the flames open up, and he is completely unfazed by the flames. And Dany sees this, and just in time pulls Drogon away to dodge his ice spear. It's from that point that the Night King's just on foot and walking to the Godswood. At this moment, Jon runs after him, and we get the the good old "what's up, bruh? Come on, bruh, come at me, bruh" moment, where he slowly starts to raise his arms to raise all of the fallen. And Jon noticed this and remembers it from Hardhome and just books it as fast as he can to try to get to the Night King before he can finish his casting time. But unfortunately, he doesn't make it, and the Night King raises the army around him, and then there's just a massive dead between Jon and the Night King, and he moves on, ignores Jon, and starts making his way to the Godswood again. We cut back a little bit. I've kind of been skipping around. There is a moment where the front gates do get breached by an undead giant, and poor Lyanna Mormont is just right there at the front gate and just gets smacked by it, by its hand, knocking her bloody. She does get up, makes a heroic charge at the giant, but he just grabs her. You hear her bones cracking as he's just crushing her, but he lifts her up just close enough for her to get a dragon glass dagger into his eye, and she takes out an undead giant. So she goes down in what most can't even say is she took down a giant, an undead giant at that. Let's see. So along with the Night King raising the dead on the battlefield, this also raises the dead in the walls of Winterfell, as well as the crypts, as everybody has said. Why didn't they think of that? We just have to ignore it. The dead start coming out of the crypts and just start taking out the civilians that are in there and trapped. Meanwhile, a lot of our key players make it out just fine. They're hiding. It's mostly no names that get taken out at that point. We cut over the Godswood, and Theon and his forces are just dwindling under their arrow fire to the undead that are breaching the Godswood, till pretty much Theon's the last one there, and he just goes ham. He runs out of arrows, but he picks up a spear, and he racks up a kill streak like no one else I've seen in this episode. While that's going on, we cut back out to the front where Jon's struggling to fight with the dead that are coming around him outside the gates, just in time for Dany to swing back around with Drogon and nuke just enough of them to clear a path for Jon back to the castle so that he can get to Bran. While Drogon, I don't know why she lands, but she lands Drogon after she does this and tells him to go. In that moment, Drogon starts getting swarmed like a army of ants, just pouring over like bread or something on a picnic, man. It's just a bunch of these whites just start covering him to the point where there's just all over him, just stabbing him repeatedly all over his body, but he doesn't take off. He can't take off. He needs to shake them off, but Dany's still on top of him. And it's not until she falls off that he takes off and starts like bucking and shakes them free. We do find out later that he's fine, that he does survive, but he is wounded. But that leaves Dany open in the middle of these walkers until she's rescued by Jorah. And this is where Jorah and Dany make a stand against them. We're going to move on from here and come back to this. We come back to the Godswood. Bran tells Theon that in the end, he's a good man, and he thanks him for everything he's done. And this gives Theon the courage to make his last charge because the Night King has breached the Godswood and is there. And Theon summons all of his courage, and if he's going to go down, he's going to go down like a hero. And he charges full on with his spear at the Night King. And as you would expect, it doesn't succeed. And unfortunately, the Night King takes the spear, snaps it, and stabs and kills Theon. As the Night King slowly approaching Bran with his posse of other whites, we get a montage cutting through everybody throughout Winterfell, struggling and fighting to their last. Jon struggling, trying to make his way through all of the chaos to get to the Godswood until he's cut off by Viserion, and he just cannot get past the dragon. It all hope really looks to be lost at this point. And we cut around between all of our heroes, and Jorah just takes hit after hit trying to protect Dany. Dany even arms herself and gets into the fight, taking out a couple of whites herself. And Sam's just on a pile of bodies, stabbing away. And Jaime, Brienne, Podrick, Tormund, they're all just overwhelmed and overrun. And you really don't know how everybody's going to make out of it. And just as the Night King makes it up to Bran, there's a genuine look of terror in Bran's eyes. And I don't know if it's supposed to be there or that's just the way the scene played out. But in that moment, you see a gust of hair from one of the whites, the long-haired whites that are following the Night King, just kind of whoosh. You hear a silence. And then you see the Night King kind of flinch, and he just quickly turns around and catches Arya leaping out of the air at him with her Valyrian steel dagger that Bran had expertly given her to use, probably in preparation for this moment. I don't know how far ahead he actually knows, because he seems to know the outcomes of some things, but not everything, because he admits he didn't expect her to actually turn north to come up there. So he doesn't know everything, but it really feels like that was planned out from him. But she, just like when she sparred Brienne, the Night King gets her by the throat with one hand and catches her armed hand with the dagger with his other hand. So both his hands are occupied, but she, just like when she was fighting Brienne, she drops that dagger, catches it with her other hand, and just jabs him in the stomach, killing him, and therefore destroying and terminating all of the undead that are sieging the castle. An intense moment. I did not see her being... It's been talked about and hinted at, and I kind of thought that her being the assassin, that, you know, I tossed around the idea, but that maybe she'd be the one to take out the Night King, though I didn't really commit to it. We cut around and we see that despite all of the pain that everyone went through, and we cut back to Dany and Jorah, and he's just taken too many hits, and he passes in front of Dany. And we actually see some emotion from Dany we haven't seen in quite some time, and she mourns Jorah's death. We get a cut back to the gates. Everybody's just kind of recovering, and we just see the Red Woman come down out of the keep, and Davos watches her, and he starts following her, and you think maybe this is the moment where he's going to get his vengeance and that he'll take it out on her at that point. But he just watches her walk out into the battlefield. She removes her necklace, and I forgot to mention that when she first showed up to Winterfell to join into the battle, she told him not to worry about killing her because she would be dead by dawn. And as the battle ends at dawn, she walks onto the battlefield, removes her necklace, and all of her age leaves her body, and she turns to a pile of bones on the battlefield. So by the end of this, our only real named fatalities are Lyanna Mormont, Jorah Mormont, Theon Greyjoy, Dolorous Edd, and Beric Dondarrion. And I guess you can add the Red Woman as well, but she didn't necessarily fight. So we have 6 main character deaths. Well, if you call them main character, they're named characters. People we have spent some time with for a while are dead. A lot of the people that were set up to die did not die, as we would have predicted from last episode. It really kind of was a little in that kind of way. It didn't feel like we lost. I don't feel like we lost as much as we were kind of prepared and led to believe. And this leaves Cersei as our final boss, our big bad at the very end, above the Night King. The Night King is not the end all be all in this. And that's kind of one thing I was kind of worried about, because after you conquer a threat like death and the undead and the army of the dead, fighting Cersei just kind of seems like chump change after that. And real quick, just because I want to touch on it a little bit more, because if you skipped the recap and just come in now, I did talk about how, it's been tossed around a little bit that Arya would be the one to get the killing blow on the Night King in this episode. I never really fully subscribed to it. I humored the idea, but it makes sense in the way that they did it. It definitely shakes up the prophecy that came with the Long Night about the flaming sword and Azor Ahai, and it really begs the question: is she supposed to be Azor Ahai then? Because she's the one that killed the Night King. So I'm a little confused on that point and where that's going to take the series from here, because according to the prophecy, I mean, of course, the prophecy can just be BS. It could be just nonsense passed down through the generations, but it's something the fans speculated about for a long time since it was introduced, since it's been brought up about who it could be. It's also debated in the books and in the fandom whether or not Azor Ahai and the prince or princess that was promised are both the same prophecy or if they're two separate prophecies. It's never that clear. Melisandre herself kind of mix and matches them quite a lot, but either way, Arya doesn't fit the requirements or stipulations of either prophecy, to what I understand of them at least. So that's really curious, and I want to know how that's going to play out going forward, or if they're... And then Melisandre just kind of dies, so she can't be around to really clarify that. So I'm really kind of confused on that point. And, after this episode, I did watch a couple of other people's thoughts on this, and I've seen the same thing kind of pop up where she does the dagger drop, and a lot of people were calling that the Rey, and referencing the moment where Rey does something similar in The Last Jedi. And I would just like to point out that technically Arya did this first. Between the two of them, this is definitely a maneuver that has been pulled off in other things. This is not the first time someone has dropped a blade to another hand to use it. That is not a new technique by any means. But with a lot of people are referring to this, the Night King just got Rey'd. Arya pulled a Rey. And, I'm not downing on Rey, but I'm just technically saying that the episode, Arya first did this in season 7, episode 4, when she shows up and spars with Brienne. And that episode aired August 6th, 2017. Almost 4 months before The Last Jedi hit theaters. So technically, Rey pulled an Arya, if you want to get technical about it. But yeah, moving on. How many people are they really left with? In the preview for next episode, we see Cersei preparing her armies. We see a little clip of Gendry and Arya making out, Winterfell burning their dead. Euron seems to be proposing to Cersei to solidify that alliance. We get a nice little shot of the people outside of Winterfell that shows Ghost and confirms that he's alive. And it's really interesting because they seem full gear on charging straight towards King's Landing after this point. At least Dany makes a comment about preparing for their assault on King's Landing. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, with what army? All of your Dothraki are dead. A vast majority, if not most, of the Unsullied are dead. There are most of the armies and the wildlings for Winterfell and the North are perceivably dead. We don't know how many people were inside the keep, inside the walls of Winterfell, and how many were really kind of just still hanging on. But from the amount we saw get taken out, it's hard to say that they have that many left. I'm willing to bet that maybe Yara and her little crew that she took to the Iron Islands, maybe they have a little bit of people that they can lend to their force, and I'm sure that they will, especially once Yara gets news that Theon fell at the battle. But I'm not too sure what is going to happen going forward. I don't really have any good predictions for the chain of events that's going to play out here, because I really thought for a long gang with the Night King that would have led us to the end. That's kind of what I was kind of betting on. But we do have the luck of the Clegane Bowl still being a possibility and something to look forward to. I still really think that Jaime is going to be the one that kills Cersei, and he's going to get the killing blow on her. He'll be the Kingslayer. He'll have to kill his own love for the betterment of the realm. And who better than her to fulfill her own prophecy for the brother she thinks is going to kill her to not be Tyrion and be the person she actually cared about the most. And it's the person he cares about for the most, and fully separate himself from her and that attachment to that former life of him. And that, I feel like that would 100% complete his redemption arc. That's what I hope for with that. I still think any of these characters that didn't die that we thought would in this fight can still die in the battles to come. They may have just held off on killing them here so that maybe they can sacrifice a couple of them to get through the final battle of the series. It's just going back to like just more regular people against regular people for the final battle of the series seems a little underwhelming, since we were building up from the White Walkers from the very beginning, from the very first episode, this supernatural force beyond the wall that came down and got stopped at the second castle that they hit. All I have to say is for the Night King and the White Walkers and the undead and all of that, I feel like this conclusion was fairly disappointing. I like the episode, but for the series as a whole, I feel like it's kind of a letdown for that whole arc. Because Cersei is despicable, but she's not worth being the final boss. She should have been the coward hiding away in King's Landing, not being the one left on top of things because she stayed back from the fight and they killed this gigantic feat of a demon that they took out that she in no way contributed to helping. It just kind of sucks in a way, because we're going to lose some good people to not the supernatural, unkillable dead things, to Cersei and her bot army. And that's the way that I feel like it'll just kind of be like a couple of these characters. If they do die in the battle against Cersei, it just will not have paid off. One little moment I didn't touch on because I kind of skipped out, down in the crypts when they were hiding, Sansa and Tyrion had another moment together where they were both hiding behind a sarcophagus. They share a tender, touching little moment where you can definitely see that these two genuinely care about each other and respect each other. Their eyes gloss over in their final, what they think may be their final moments. They both grip their dragon glass daggers, and for a moment you don't know if they're going to like kiss or do a joint suicide, because maybe this would be a better way out for themselves, or if they were just prepping themselves, pumping themselves up to go in and try to defend the people that they can. Thankfully enough, they didn't need to do that. So I will say overall, I did enjoy the episode. I do think some of the shots were a little too dark. For this to be the biggest battle for the season, that they did say this is the biggest battle of the season. This is the biggest. They've gloated about this being the biggest battle on TV and cinematic history. And I feel like it didn't really feel like it. It didn't feel like a huge battle, maybe because of the giant hordes. Maybe it's mostly because of how dark everything is, the shifting around, the cuts to the dragons in the sky. Just something about it didn't feel that huge. It is a huge moment. There was a lot of people there, but it just didn't feel as insane as they were kind of making it up to be and hyping it up to be. And again, for this to be the Night King's final moments and the final arc, the end of the arc for the army of the undead, it's a little bit of a letdown. I really wanted this to fall back for, I was really hoping for like the Night King to actually not be there and maybe go take King's Landing and just really shove that in Cersei's face, though we wouldn't get that genuine conclusion to Jeremy's arc if that to Jaime's arc if that happened. So that would have been the trade-off there. So I understand it. I don't hate it. I'm not against it. I like it for what it is. But that's the thing when you kind of build up and you theorize and you come up with all these ideas. Sometimes it's more than what you end up with. But I trust that they know what they're doing, and I trust that they know how to tell a compelling story. I'm still just waiting for Dany to make the wrong decision, and I really think she's going to kill Jon at the end of this. I think she's going to be the one to betray Jon at the end. Maybe they both they succeed over Cersei. They take the Iron Throne, and then towards the end, she just kills him for it. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know somewhere along the line, I don't feel like she's going to make the right call. I just still don't. We saw a little bit of her humanity coming back with Jorah Fell, so maybe that'll carry on. I know Emilia Clarke has said that she makes a decision somewhere in this season that a lot of people are going to hate her for. And I don't know if that's just kind of like a bait and switch. She's just telling us that so that we're on our toes for something throughout the season, that, you know, just to keep us on edge, and maybe that doesn't happen. I don't know. That's kind of what I hope. I would hope to be wrong about that. I know they said the ending is going to be bittersweet, but I don't know in what way. And that's one thing I'm going to say. I think Dany is definitely going to betray Jon, and she may kill him, or I believe it might come down to that she was like, all right, it comes down. She tries to kill Jon, but she turns the dragons on him, and they refuse to do it because, of course, ends up being the prince that was promised, and because of his Targaryen blood, the dragons just don't torch him. I don't know. There's a lot of things that might play out with this. There's a lot of possibilities that I'm going to have to ponder now after this whole change of direction on where I thought it was going to go after the Battle of Winterfell. So we'll have to see what the next episode sets up. The preview really doesn't give us a whole lot aside from the proposal of Euron to Cersei, and really just everybody gearing up. It looks like we're going to get an episode full of downtime and probably some catch up where people are mentally after all of this before we move forward. And that's about it. So we're probably going to have to wait until next week before we can start to theorize the direction of the series a little bit more down to the detail. Maybe zero in on what theories we can kind of expect or latch onto that might follow throughout the final 3 episodes. 3 left in this season. But I think we've been talking for a little while now, and I think it's good time. I'm going to pass this off to you guys. How did you guys feel about this episode? Were you all disappointed? Did you feel like it lived up to the hype? How do you feel about the people that did make it out and the people that didn't make it out? Leave all that down in the comments below. We'll have a conversation about it. I'd love to talk to you guys down there about it as well. Join in the comments with you all. But for now, that's it for this episode. We'll stop back in next week. If you want to, check out all my other videos, and make sure, if you like this, to like, comment, subscribe, support the channel, and we'll continue following the show until its conclusion. And for now, that's it for today. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you guys. Take care.